by acknowledging and celebrating the first Australians on whose traditional lands we meet, and pay our respect to the elders past and present. Maria Monica Wihardja, Monica, will talk about self-exposure, self-belief, and self-reporting bias in Indonesia's president election. A little bit about Monica. Dr. Monica is a visiting fellow and co-coordinator of the Media, Technology, and Society program at ISG, Yusof Ishak Institute, and also adjunct assistant professor at the National University of Singapore. This is a hybrid event, and we'll be taking questions from those in the room as well as online. For those attending online, you can write your questions in the Q&A box, and we will read them out for you. Now, let's welcome Monica.
Hi, good afternoon, friends and colleagues, and distinguished audience both offline and online. Really great to be back at ANU after so many years, and thank you for coming to my presentation. So today I'm going to present my study with Professor Burhanuddin Muhtadi on selective exposure, selective belief, and self-reporting bias in Indonesia's 2024 presidential election. So during the election campaigns, presidential election campaigns this year, there were a lot of disinformation and election propaganda narratives spreading around, being circulated, and going viral, including those with AI-generated content, such as the deepfake videos portraying an audio recording of Surya Paloh reprimanding Anies Baswedan, and another deepfake video portraying Prabowo speaking in Arabic. So we have, in our study, we have two research questions in mind. The first one is related to the phenomena called selective exposure and selective belief, in which we ask the question, how did partisanship affect voters' exposures to and belief in disinformation and election propaganda narratives, including both personality-based and party-based partisanship, and including disinformation and election propaganda narratives with and without deepfake content. And the second research question that we studied is regarding the phenomenon called self-reporting bias, in which we asked the question, did respondents report truthfully, or were their responses affected by partisan cheerleading? In other words, whether respondents may provide politically congenial responses instead of the true exposure and true beliefs when they responded to surveyors' questions regarding their exposures and belief in disinformation and election propaganda narratives. Just to explain a little bit about this phenomena of selective exposure and selective belief, just imagine you are staunch supporters of Prabowo, and you are being shown a deepfake video with Prabowo speaking in Arabic, which is a positive portrayal of Prabowo, which appeals a lot to Islamist voters and was being targeted to Islamist voters. Holding everything else constant, your age, gender, your income level, education level, religion, then you're more likely to believe in that deepfake video compared to Anies or Ganjar supporters. That is the phenomenon called selective belief. And similarly, holding everything as constant, then you're more likely to having been exposed to the deepfake video portraying Prabowo speaking in Arabic than Anies or Ganjar supporters. That is called selective exposure phenomenon. We use a two-wave panel survey conducted before the start of the election campaigns and towards the end of the election campaigns. And both waves were conducted through face-to-face interviews with 2,020 respondents, 1,919 of which were interviewed in both waves. And both ways preserve the composition of the true population in terms of gender, rural, urban, age group, religion, ethnicity, and provincial location. So now let's look at our first study on the phenomenon of selective exposure and selective belief. This study follows the same or similar methodology as used in Neyazi and Muhtadi study in 2021 on selective exposure and selective belief in the 2019 presidential election. And using the survey, the panel survey data that I just described, we used respondents' likelihood to vote for a presidential candidate in the case of personality-based partisanship, and the likelihood to vote for a political party in legislative election in the case of party-based partisanship in wave 1 before the election campaigns started as a determinant to respondents' exposure to and belief in disinformation and election propaganda narrative towards the end of the election campaigns. And the panel, the nature of the panel survey allows us to control for the endogenity bias. We use odds ratio logistic regression controlling for respondents' profiles to study this phenomena. We tested both personality-based and party-based selective exposure and selective belief in disinformation and election propaganda narratives with and without AI-generated content. Let's look at our first finding on personality-based selective exposure and selective belief in disinformation with AI-generated content. We tested 2 deepfake videos on respondents. The first deepfake video portrays an audio recording of Surya Paloh reprimanding Anies Baswedan. And the second deepfake video portraying Prabowo delivered a speech in Arabic. Before I go into the analytical findings, our survey shows that there was actually, yes?
Can you clarify a little bit on the statement? Exactly how you show that, what happened, what is you do with this statement? You send it to the...
So the surveyor shows, first they ask, they show the video for like about 30 seconds, each deepfake video.
Second survey, in the second wave, or in the first wave?
In the second wave. Yeah, because this video were not very viral in the first wave. But later on, I will talk about some election propaganda narratives that were already viral before the election campaign started. And we look at the changes in the exposures and the belief to look at how they may sway voters' preferences. So this we showed these deepfake videos in the second wave. Yeah. So there were 2 questions when the survey showed the video. The first question was, have you seen or heard this video before? Right? And then the second question, do you think this video is fake or real? So there was a low exposure and low belief in the deepfake video portraying an audio recording of Surya Paloh reprimanding Anies. Only 23.2% of our respondents said that they have ever heard or seen this video before. And only 17.6% of our respondents, regardless whether or not they have seen the video or heard the video before, say that this conversation really took place between Surya Paloh and Anies Baswedan. And similarly, there was low exposure and low belief in regards to deepfake video portraying Prabowo speaking in Arabic. Only 18.6% of our respondents reported they have ever seen or heard this video before, but a slightly higher percentage of our respondents of 28.2% reported they think that the Prabowo speech speaking in Arabic really took place. But despite this low exposure and low belief in these two deepfake videos, partisanship or initial preference towards a presidential candidate can affect one's exposure to and beliefs in these deepfake videos. So using odds ratio logistic regression controlling for respondents' profiles, including age, gender, income level, education level, religion, then those who are more inclined to vote for Ganjar Mahfud were less likely to have been exposed to deepfake video of Prabowo speaking in Arabic, arguably due to their more pluralist voters. So we argue that these findings could be influenced by the fact that Ganjar Mahfud voters come from PDIP nationalist voters who are more aligned to the pluralist camp instead of the Islamist camps along the ideological spectrums of Indonesian voters, and maybe operating in different information system than that of Anies Mohaimin and Prabowo Gibran's pairs, and hence were less likely to having been exposed to a deepfake video that appealed more and was targeted towards Islamist voters. It is shown in the graph on the right-hand side. At the same time, likelihood to vote, your initial preference towards a presidential candidate did not affect respondents' exposure to the deepfake video portraying Surya Paloh reprimanding Anies, which is shown in the graph on the left-hand side.
Monica, one
Yes.
small question. Which direction of causality that you are inferring with, for example, the first one?
So partisanship.
So those who were inclined to vote Ganjar were less likely to have been exposed. So that is
Yeah.
because they are inclined to vote, then they have been exposed, or because they are less likely exposed, then they inclined to.
Because they have initial preference towards a presidential candidate. So from partisanship to exposure, not the other way around. So I have a study on the reverse causality later on. Yeah. So this as I already mentioned, we look at their initial preference towards voting for a certain presidential candidate before the election campaign, and we measure their exposure to and belief in this deepfake video towards the end of the election campaigns. So the causality goes from partisanship towards exposure to and belief. And why this is important? Because such partisanship could entrench the existing political privileges. In other words, such partisanship, whether it's personality-based or party-based partisanship, in terms of how Indonesian voters perceive disinformation and election propaganda, can increase polarization.
Let's please give a question for clarifying on it.
Yeah.
And if
It's okay. Yeah, it's good. Because I want the audience to understand what I'm talking about. So let's now move to selective belief, right? We found that those who are more inclined to vote for Anies Mohaimin were less likely to believe the deepfake video of Surya Paloh reprimanding Anies because it's a negative portrayal of Anies. And those who are more inclined to vote for Anies Mohaimin and Ganjar Mahfud pairs were less likely to believe the deepfake video of Prabowo speaking in Arabic, which is a positive portrayal of Prabowo, albeit with slightly less statistical power. So we tested this personality-based selective exposure and selective belief not only on this information with AI-generated content, such as the deepfake videos that we just saw, but also on non-AI generated disinformation and election propaganda narratives. First of all, let me try to explain the difference between disinformation narratives and election propaganda narratives. Disinformation narratives are narratives that we have confirmed to be fake and which have been confirmed by fact-checking website to be fake, right? Such as Anies Baswedan is among those who received money from the communication tower corruption case of the Ministry of ICT. Or Indonesian Election Commission has confirmed that Gibran has purchased fake university degree in Australia to the amount of 500 million rupiah with state budget. Those are disinformation narratives. Election propaganda narratives were narratives that basically were made viral, but those are not necessarily fake, but could favor certain candidates. For example, narrative that Anies Baswedan is the father of identity politics, that nepotism was involved in Gibran's nomination as vice presidential candidate, Ganjar Pranowo is a puppet of Megawati. Those are election propaganda narratives. And we tested both on disinformation narratives and election propaganda narratives. And we found even a stronger evidence of personality-based selective belief, but not selective exposure in regards to people's belief in non-AI generated disinformation and election propaganda narratives. For example, in regards to nepotism involved in Gibran's nomination as vice presidential candidate, those who are more inclined to vote for Anies Mohaimin were more likely to believe in such narrative. Those who are more inclined to vote for Prabowo and Gibran were less likely to believe in the narratives. These are all significant coefficients. Another example is that in regards to Ganjar Pranowo as not an independent presidential candidate and will only be Megawati's puppet if he is later elected as president, those who are more likely to vote for Anies Mohaimin were more likely to believe in such narrative. Those who are more inclined to vote for Ganjar Mahfud were less likely to believe in such narratives. Now we compare personality-based partisanship with party-based partisanship. I mean, our hypothesis is that party-based partisanship will be weaker in Indonesia's weak party system. So we tested party-based selective exposure and selective belief with AI in disinformation with AI generated content, the two deepfake videos that I mentioned earlier. And first of all, let me show you some statistics regarding how respondents change their preferences in regards to their preferred presidential candidate, but also their preferred political party to choose in legislative elections. Although 31% of panel respondents changed their presidential candidate preference between wave 1 and wave 2, notably 30% of Ganjar Mahfud's early supporters moving to Prabowo Gibran's camp, close to half of our respondents changed their political party preference in the legislative election between wave 1 and wave 2. So this confirmed Indonesia's weak party system, and the findings shows strong personality-based loyalties, but weak party-based loyalties. The findings on party-based selective exposure and selective belief in disinformation and election propaganda narratives shows that evidence of party-based selective belief is not as prevalent as evidence of personality-based selective belief, which is expected given Indonesia's weak party system. For example, in regards to deepfake video 1, voters choosing political parties aligned with Anies, namely PKB, PKS, and Nasdem, were less likely to believe than those choosing Prabowo's main political party, Gerindra. But those choosing Golkar and Democratic Party were also less likely to believe than those choosing Prabowo's main political party, Gerindra. In regards to deepfake video 2, portraying Prabowo speaking in Arabic, voters choosing PKS were less likely to believe than those choosing Gerindra, which back Prabowo. There's, however, no evidence of party-based selective exposure in the two deepfake videos. Now, we also tested party-based selective exposure and selective belief in disinformation and election propaganda narrative without AI-generated content. There is some evidence of selective belief on disinformation and election propaganda narrative without deepfake content. For example, voters choosing political parties aligned with Prabowo and Anies, namely Gerindra, Nasdem, PKS, were more likely to believe the narratives that Ganjar was the puppet of Megawati compared to voters choosing PDIP, which back Ganjar Mahfud. Another example is that voters choosing PKS, which back Anies, were more likely to believe than voters choosing Gerindra in the narrative that Gibran's vice presidential candidacy involved nepotism. However, this evidence is weaker compared to the evidence of personality-based selective beliefs on disinformation and election propaganda narratives without deepfake content. So let me now move on to our study on the phenomenon of self-reporting bias, in which we ask the question whether respondents report truthfully or were their responses affected by partisan cheerleading, whether respondents may provide politically congenial responses just to be cheerleading their candidate. Using the same example, if you are staunch supporters of Prabowo, even though when you are shown the deepfake video of portraying Prabowo speaking in Arabic, even though you believe that the video is fake, you still report to the surveyors that the fake video is actually real because you want to be cheerleading your preferred candidate. This is called the phenomenon of self-reporting bias. We use unconditional cross correlation metrics and conditional correlation analysis using odds ratio logistic regression. Even though the survey was not designed to monitor self-reporting bias, but then we can use different questions in the questionnaire and compare responses of respondents to these different questions to see some evidence of self-reporting bias. For example, we compare respondents' responses in regards to their belief in disinformation and propaganda narrative with AI-generated content with their responses to the questions on concerns about the use of AI and in elections, for example, large-scale disinformation. Those who are more concerned about the use of AI in election, holding everything else constant, should be also those who have lower belief in disinformation and propaganda narratives with AI-generated content. Another analysis that we did was to compare respondents' responses in regards to their exposures to disinformation and propaganda narrative without deepfake content, and their responses to exposure in regards to general misinformation and disinformation. Those who reported that they were more exposed to general disinformation and misinformation should also be those who reported that they were more exposed to disinformation and election propaganda narrative with or without deepfake content. So our findings show that there is no evidence of self-reporting bias in regards to how respondents reported their exposures to disinformation and election propaganda narratives. But there is evidence of self-reporting bias in regards to how respondents reported their belief to disinformation and election propaganda narratives. For example, Those who are more concerned about the use of AI in elections had higher belief in the fake video portraying Prabowo speaking in Arabic. And this seemingly seeming evidence of self-reporting bias in regards to respondents perceiving disinformation, deepfake disinformation video portraying Prabowo speaking in Arabic is only evident among prospective voters of Prabowo Gibran. This self-reporting bias is not evidence among among prospective voters of Anies or Ganjar. Another example is that among Anies and Ganjar supporters, those who are more concerned about propaganda, fake news, and hoaxes had higher belief in nepotism in regards to Gibran's vice presidential candidacy. And this self-reporting bias is only evident among Anies and Ganjar supporters, but not evident among Prabowo Gibran's prospective voters. So in conclusion, in the context of Indonesia's weak party system, it is personality-based partisanship sentiments rather than party-based partisanship sentiments that exert the stronger influence on voters' susceptibility to and acceptance of disinformation and election propaganda narratives. Although there is evidence of selective belief in terms of party-based partisanship, is weaker than the evidence from personality-based selective belief. And also selective belief is more prevalent than selective exposure. One's exposure to certain disinformation and election propaganda narrative doesn't guarantee one's belief in those disinformation and election propaganda narrative. In other words, belief is a more complex concept than exposure. And primary evidence of self-reporting bias in how Indonesians report their belief, but not necessarily exposure. So there's evidence of self-reporting bias in how Indonesians report their beliefs, but not exposure to selected disinformation and propaganda narratives, which leads us to conclude that for future surveys, there's indeed a need to control for self-reporting bias. So that's our study on selective exposure and selective belief phenomena, and also self-reporting bias phenomenon. I have other studies, including how this information, this is the reverse causality of what I've been talking about. So we studied also how this information and election propaganda narratives could sway voters' voting behaviors among swing voters, among those who are not, who were undecided before the election campaigns, or who were not staunch supporters or loyalists to any presidential candidate. I'll be happy to go over it if there's time, but otherwise I will stop here.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Monica. That was pretty. You still have a lot of time. We have plenty of time to discussion. I'm sure.
Okay.
There are a lot of questions in terms of about the methodology, about the analysis, and I think we have plenty of time to do that.
Yes.
We can start with Marcus.
Thank you. Can I first ask what you plan to do with this? Is this for a journal or?
It's for a book chapter.
For a book chapter, okay. Because, I mean, to be honest, you know, it's a nice little study and you have good material, but it's exactly what we would expect. I mean, there's nothing in it that would be surprising, both in the Indonesian context as well as the international one. If you were allowed to go to America, Trump versus Harris, you would find exactly the same thing. People believe what they want to believe because of their partisanship. And indeed, I think has done several studies before on surveys
2019
and so forth. So, and I was struck that, I mean, normally if you wanted to place it in a journal or even a book chapter, you know, you would start out by laying out the land of the literature,
and would then sort of try to explain what your contribution is to that literature. And again, because I suspect what you've been doing here doesn't really challenge what we already know, you would probably find it quite hard to make an argument we are proving the existing literature wrong or we are adding to it. So how would you respond to that? How would you package this? Again, this why I was asking if this is for an ICS report and, you know, which is narrative based and data is good and it's a good story. And for Indonesianists, it's sort of interesting. But again, how would you package it for somebody here in the room who is not an Indonesianist who would be doing similar studies on Latin America or the US or other parts of Asia? How would you make that interesting to a person who is not embedded in this, you know, politicking of Indonesia?
So, I'm aware of Pak Burhan's earlier work on selective exposure and selective belief. Of course, he's aware of his own work. I can say that I can say three contribution, although it might be little contribution to the literature, right? The first one is that we tested on disinformation and election propaganda with AI generated content. I don't think the existing literature now has done disinformation election propaganda narrative with AI generated content. That is something that is like a new phenomenon. And then secondly, as far as I'm aware of, Pak Burhan's earlier studies on selective exposure and selective measure did not use panel data. They use cross-sectional data, so there could be some endogeneity bias in the analysis. We use panel data. And then thirdly, Pak Burhan's earlier work only look at party-based partisanship. We actually compare party-based vis-a-vis personality-based partisanship and compare the evidence in both party-based and personality-based partisanship. So that's kind of like more of the technical contribution that I can think of. In terms of the non-technical ones, I understand maybe for a general public, you know, this is something that this is not the first time that I heard like, oh, we already knew that, right? But then for at least for policymakers sitting in Singapore and hopefully, you know, around the world, they want to quantify and they really want to see more quantitative studies on such a phenomena. So it's like, oh yeah, you know, we know this information, election propaganda, including with AI generated content, is very dangerous. It's a threat to democracy, to election outcomes. But what's the evidence? What's the quantitative evidence? And we have this really rich data, rich panel data that we take advantage of in order to really show evidence and really quantify the extent to which this disinformation and election propaganda narrative could really affect in terms of increasing polarization in the society and to sway votes.
But so this last part, you
Yeah.
have told us about, right? So it doesn't swing votes. Because if you wanted to make a strong argument, in fact, you could, from your own data, say it actually doesn't. Only people who are already locked in the partisanship
Yes.
towards a certain person
Yes.
believe even the AI video, right? So you could turn this around and actually say, we don't have to worry that much about it because the people that
Yes.
they want to change the vote of actually don't buy it.
Yes. So for this, for the selective exposure and selective belief, we were really talking about these staunch supporters, right? And if you are staunch supporters of some presidential candidate or a political party, then you could lie or you could have a bias in terms of your exposure and belief. But in this study, when we study the reverse causality, we only focus on the swing voters. So we are saying basically, yes, this information or election propaganda might not work as expected because people have initial preferences or initial bias, right? But for those who are not staunch supporters or loyalists to a presidential candidate or political party, our question is that could disinformation election propaganda can still sway their votes or voting behaviors? And in this study, which I'll be happy to go over it, then we show that yes, changes in not exposure but belief in certain most salient disinformation and election propaganda narrative could still sway voting behaviors among only swing voters. Swing voters is those who are undecided in wave one, and or those who change their votes between the two waves. So focusing on this only swing voters, could disinformation and election propaganda narrative could still sway their voting behaviors. That's this study here.
Sorry, but for how many? What are we talking about? I mean,
So
yeah.
We can go over it. Yeah.
Yeah.
This.
So out of 2020 respondents, I believe there were 600 to both who changed their votes between wave one and wave two, and or they were undecided before, and by wave two they decided on their votes.
No. How many changed their votes because of what they have seen? That's
I see. So yeah. Basically, this is our main findings. So changes in the belief about nepotism. So about nepotism in Gibran's vice presidential election nomination, for example. So let's say in wave one, you said that, oh, you don't believe that there's not nepotism involved, but by wave two, you said that you believe that there's nepotism. Then that increases the likelihood for you to vote in favor of Anies Mohaimin and Ganjar Mahfud, and decrease your likelihood to vote for Prabowo Gibran towards the end of the election campaigns in wave two. And changes in the belief in Ganjar as the puppet of Megawati increase the likelihood to vote for Prabowo Gibran, while decrease the likelihood for Ganjar Mahfud, but not statistically significant for Anies Mohaimin votes. And changes in the belief of Anies as the father of Indian politics increase likelihood to vote for Ganjar Mahfud, while decrease likelihood to vote for Anies Mohaimin, but not statistically significant for Prabowo Gibran's vote. And the findings also show that having changes in the exposure to this election propaganda narrative did not really sway your swing voters' voting behaviors, but changes in the belief in the election propaganda narrative could sway swing voters' voting behaviors. And we also tested it, only among internet users vis-a-vis, all swing voters, and the result was still robust. And then thirdly, interestingly, likelihood to vote for Anies Mohaimin was not really affected by changes in exposure or belief in this election propaganda narrative, compared to likelihood to vote for Prabowo Gibran's and Ganjar Mahfud. So all in all, the study shows that beliefs or changes in the beliefs in certain election propaganda narratives could indeed sway votes among those who were initially undecided or were not loyalists of a presidential candidate. So the first study shows basically among like staunch supporters or loyalists, then you have this partisanship in terms of your exposure and belief, which make disinformation and election propaganda may not be as effective as is intended to. But then the second study shows that if you are swing voters, that disinformation and election propaganda narrative could still sway your votes. So there's still a danger of disinformation and election propaganda narratives.
Okay. You can talk later if you're not convinced.
That might be a lot more interesting.
Okay, that's right.
And if you're not convinced, you can ask again later. So, what's the,
Thank you for the presentation. So it seems to me, if you would like to stay as an association, there's an association between stronger belief and decision to make, that's fine. But it seems to me that you're going to talk about causality. That because of this cost, this one. And number one, I think you need to explain clearly on the experiment. And second is that how you actually test it. So on the experiment, this is so you are basically showing this video.
Mhm.
Are all respondents receiving the video or not? Because if you would
Yes,
like to stay,
all receiving.
no, so then you don't have control.
No.
Yeah, so if you don't have control, pushing to causality will be difficult. Because before and after, yeah, if you trying to do before and after, you need to have control, which is somebody that never get it. And so when you introduce this, you compare two people have the same characteristic. One get this fake video and one do not. And if the one is actually changed, then that is the fact of the video. If they don't change, that video doesn't happen. Because you don't have any control, I think it is very difficult.
I think it's useful to go to the
Are you
methodology.
talking about the first study or the second study?
Well, it doesn't matter. You know, so you're trying to, okay, maybe I don't understand your study. So you study, let's forget about self-reporting problem. Just talk about whether people are actually have belief or they got exposure in terms of making decisions. So that is basically you want to do, and then you would like to test that exposure doesn't matter, isn't it?
No, partisanship. So
So
okay.
you go to your one of
Perhaps you
the
can go
slide,
back to
you
the
know.
earlier
Sure,
slide.
sure. I did not put like I did not put the regression.
It doesn't matter, it's just the principle. Now, that one.
Okay.
That box.
Oh, this one. Okay.
No, there's between belief and exposure. I think before that.
The research questions. Research
In the
questions.
beginning.
Oh, this
Yeah,
one.
this one. So,
Okay.
let's say you actually, so this part is actually I don't really, are you testing whether selective exposure is important comparing to selective belief? Is that
No.
the main question?
So my main question is whether partisanship, right? So your initial preference in wave 1 could affect your exposure to and belief in wave 2.
Okay, so let's say in a comment, what is your right-hand side?
My right-hand side is your likelihood to vote in wave 1.
You likely to vote in
Wave 1, likelihood to vote for a certain presidential candidate in wave 1. So in wave 1,
then how you ensure?
no, but it's a weak exogeneity assumption, right? Because the left-hand side is measured in wave 2 afterwards. So what you measure in wave 2 cannot really affect your response in wave 1.
Well, that's in terms of reverse causality, but in terms of omitting variable bias, you still got a problem over there. So looking to what you're doing, it seems to be the one that could be exogenous if you do it properly, is where you're showing the fake.
Yeah. I mean, we don't, yeah, that's like,
Exogenous.
that's like, I understand. I mean, that's like, if you want like pure exogeneity, so we only assume weak exogeneity in terms of the right-hand side is measured before the.
That's not strong enough. So I don't think you could argue for causality in that sense. You've got omitting variable bias.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that if you want to have like very strong causality, then you have to do like, RCT, but no, we don't have that.
Okay, there's one question online, is there?
Oh, yes. We have one question online from Terry Hall here. With nearly 50% change in party between wave 1 and 2, what does that tell us about the reliability of the surveys?
Sorry, with
Reliability
of the survey.
with what? With 50% off?
Changing.
change in party between wave 1 and 2.
How does it affect it's a panel respondents, right? So it's the same respondents. They just changed their party preferences in 2 months before and after election campaign. So in November, they said, okay, if there is elective legislation, that I would choose for PDIP. And then by February, they said that they would choose for Gerindra. I don't see how.
Yeah, I guess
Uh-huh.
the question from Terihal
Very
Yeah.
hard.
is whether that's actually a true answer within one. Do they actually change their mind? Is it reliable or not? That you
Oh, I
probably
see.
cannot tell.
So that's kind of like self-reporting bias, is it? We did a test for self-reporting bias in regards to respondents' responses in terms of party that they chose. Yeah. But for me, I'm sure like Marcus can answer this better. But for me, it makes sense because of Indonesia's weak party loyalties. Then I don't see why it's an anomaly that 50% of our respondents say that they changed their
Can you say
party.
again when was wave 1 and
Yeah, can you
wave 2?
show the? I think that's
Sure.
useful to show the very first one.
Yeah.
This one,
So
yeah.
the first one is just before the election campaign started.
So I think the answer for Terry is that in that time, Jokowi's decisions and the manipulations that he deployed messed up a lot of people's preferences for
Right.
these elections. So traditional VDIP voters
Move to Gerindra.
would have moved because of what Jokowi did. Jokowi broke with the party and so forth. So this is a very specific way. So I don't think we would normally see 50% of people moving. And the same was true with Gerindra and Prabowo. A lot of the previous Gerindra voters moved to Anies and to PKS and so forth, right? So I think we have a very specific jump in the number of swing voters in terms of party, not in terms of personalities.
Yeah, I hope that answers Terry's question as well. Sarah?
Two questions. First one is on the sample. So can you elaborate a bit more on the representativeness? So are they on Jakarta, for example? And
No, it's All right, go ahead.
yeah. Second one is on your second study is saying there's no changing exposure but changing belief. Can you just maybe try to explain why belief would change without changing exposure, and how that help you to say this from get-go number is important because the exposure will change. I'm just trying to get my head around why it's an important finding to support the conclusion that this information, whatever, is actually important. Swinging their votes.
So in regards to sample, as already mentioned here, it's like a national survey. So we surveyed in 34 provincial locations, not 38. So we just lump Papua, right? And we use multi-stage proportional random sampling methodology with village as the primary sampling unit. And yeah, it preserved the composition in terms of gender. So it's about like 50-50, rural urban age group, religion, ethnicity. I have slides to show that the sample is representative to preserve the composition of the true population. I think what I was really glad and what I was pushing the firm survey to do is to preserve most of the respondents, right? If the retention rate is high, the retention rate is low, then we will not be able to do like this kind of like panel survey. So we were able to preserve 1,919 respondents out of 2020. And in terms of the changes in the belief vis-a-vis changes in exposure. Okay, let's just so we let me just show you this right. So we control for changes in exposure and changes in belief and use predicted belief in wave 2 to see how it affects votes among swing voters in wave 2. So your question is why changes in beliefs like matter in terms of swaying votes, but not changes in exposure. Is that your question?
Well, you showed, I saw you said the exposure didn't change, but the belief changed.
No. So changes in exposure. So whether or not, there's a change in your exposure, yeah, it doesn't matter. Yeah. But changes in belief matters. And I think it's because unlike belief, exposure to disinformation, election propaganda narratives can be targeted by opponents or presidential candidates. So what I see in my social media could be like targeted, but my belief cannot be targeted. So I think that's the reason why changes in exposure. So you can be more exposed to during the election campaigns to certain disinformation, election propaganda narrative, but it will not sway your votes. It's only when you are exposed and when you believe, then it can sway your votes. But just changes in your exposure may not.
And then the problem, like the conclusion is, it doesn't matter then, no matter how much you.
At least it's not significantly, yeah.
It's not a issue.
Yeah. But belief, or whether or not you change your belief to certain disinformation and election propaganda narratives can affect your voting behavior.
Any more questions?
Well, if not, we have one online question.
One online and then I
Okay.
so
So,
we're meeting.
this is from Gavin Mao. He said, does your data provide detail on regions? In provinces with high rates of undecided voters, are the findings stronger or weaker?
Data on based on province and then
Regions, and then in provinces with high rates of undecided voters, are the findings stronger or weaker?
no, I have not done the analysis. But we do have data on provincial location of the respondents, but I don't know if just focusing on certain regions could give like a strong statistical power on this analysis. Yeah, but that's an interesting comment and something to just look at maybe descriptively.
Thank you.
Actually,
Yeah, I've been thinking about the survey itself. I know Firman is the authority on this matter, but ethical procedure. Did you go through ethical procedure clearance?
Not we use Pak Burhan's LSI from survey. We have, of course, we have consent form.
But when you give the fake feed, that's fake, right? And then they
So
don't know
no,
that.
we make a disclaimer. We make a disclaimer that when we test it on their belief, right, and exposure to this information and election propaganda narratives, we make a disclaimer that some of these narratives are false. So it's something that they should not take it as like true, because I'm aware of the possibility that it could, like, people think when you ask, right, people think that it's true. No, we make a disclaimer beforehand when we ask.
But
So
that itself can influence their thinking.
I think we make clear this is only for like we want to test, but we say that this election and disinformation narratives that we're going to say, right, may be false. So yeah.
Yeah, that was going to be my question.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's fine because
So I'm aware of this.
because you're
I'm aware
introducing-
that we should not. I mean, of course, like none of the survey should be trying to like sway or like trying to spread even more like disinformation and propaganda narrative, right? So we make that disclaimer beforehand. So we say like, oh, we're gonna show you videos, right, that are not I think for the fake video we even say like no, we didn't say it's fake, but we say that it may be false.
Yeah, that was also my question.
Yeah.
You're basically
it's not-
introducing
it's not-
AI to you're introducing disinformation to the respondent in a
Yeah,
sense.
but I think that's the best that we can do, that we make the disclaimer, because if we say that this video is fake, how can we ask for their belief, right?
Firman, do you remember how did they, this famous study about, the fake surname on the CV?
Yeah, all the CV.
Yeah,
is
how
a
did
lot
they-
of. I think there are ethical issues with that now because you're saturating the market
Yeah.
with fake CVs, fake names. That there are obviously.
And then
some-
for if you look at and we also make sure that on the disinformation and election propaganda narrative, we make sure that each candidate get one disinformation and one election propaganda narrative story. So it's not like all Prabowo or like favorable to one, yeah. But I don't know what else you can do. I mean, if you want to test people's belief, you cannot say it's false. But so we did have a disclaimer beforehand that all this, like what we are going to ask, may not be true.
Yeah, so I have a different question, but since Acho said that, is this possible that actually you expose with something that not fake, isn't it? There's still possible, isn't it, to do this experiment that
You did.
having something that not fake? So because you just want to test the
Mhm.
exposure,
Mhm.
that I thought that might be much safer if you, yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So the one shaded in gray are all narratives that were already fact checked to be false. There's like already some kind of official statement that these narratives are false, right?
Yeah, I understand it, but why you don't use a video that is actually true?
Oh, because we want to test for this AI generated content.
Yeah, but the AI doesn't always say.
Yeah, but I don't know. Is there disinformation deepfake that, I mean, by the name, disinformation is
Okay,
fake,
no,
right?
sorry. So your focus is more on fake information.
Yeah,
not-
disinformation.
Yeah, that's exactly the research question.
That's
Yeah, disinformation.
And you're using the existing deepfake, but the issue is you're introducing to people who probably have
Don't
not
know.
exposed. But the deepfake, you didn't create the deepfake, right?
No, no,
It's existing deepfake that's
Yeah.
circulated,
Yeah.
but you're introducing them to.
And it's actually already fact check. I mean, if you try to Google to look at any of this video, it will not appear because it's already been banned. It's already been removed. So it's already been confirmed to be false. I don't remember, but when we designed the survey, at least one of our team members was able to get the video. So it might not be yet taken from online, but afterwards, like right now, if you try to find this video, it will not be online.
Okay. Any more questions?
I would like to suggest if there is other survey that's similar, almost similar time, You combine, and those survey do not have this experiment. You combine those surveys, so then you get control. Yeah, that probably will make you, if you find the right technique, you could get a causality.
So,
Same.
sorry,
So-
if,
Is there any other agency that conducting a survey?
Mhm.
Yeah, and they don't have these things, so, and then the survey is almost the same figure as you. You just merge their survey in with your survey. So then you have your survey in which people get treated. And their survey in which people do not get treated.
and then we ask again
Or you
about,
borrow control from others.
Yeah, you
Study.
borrow control from others, yeah. So then.
and then, but the other study did not ask about their exposure or
Yeah.
Believe-
No, I have to express just the decision, what is your left hand side, isn't it whether they choose someone or?
yes, but then
But
the
you
right
do
hand
want
side
to
is
have a
control.
baseline. You do want to have a baseline beliefs, baseline exposure.
Yes,
and then-
yes.
Your baseline is, what they're going to choose, isn't it?
Oh, so which study you're talking about? Because they have to study, is the exact reverse. But then, this whole study is about disinformation and election propaganda narrative, right? I mean, so there has to be question related to that.
So then your right hand side should be this information, isn't it? So because when I said whether your right hand side is this information, you said no, my right hand side of variable of interest is what is they going to choose in the first way.
So in selective belief and selective exposure, the left hand side is their their belief and exposure.
Yeah, their belief and exposure. The exposure is this one, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, so that is the, and then on the left hand side, what is?
No, that's the left hand side. Exposure and belief is the left hand side.
I don't know, I don't understand. Exposure, how come?
Because the right hand side, right? No, because the right hand side is your initial preference towards a candidate. You want to know whether the right hand side, your likelihood to vote for a certain president candidate, affect your exposure to and belief in wave
So
two.
the exposure is not your experiment, one that you show it. The exposure is your question, whether have you seen this video or
Yes,
not.
yes.
Yeah, so that one is no possibility of causality.
Well, if you assume weak exogeneity,
Causality is always a problem in social science.
Well, that's
So
just what
she has
society.
made a claim of causality, but you are bringing it in.
Well, I asked and she said that there's.
I'm just assuming I'm assuming it's weak exogeneity, meaning like what you measure in wave one.
Association, I'm fine. I'm not doing, it's whatever you would like to say, it's association, I'm fine. But when you start going to say that it's an association, that worry.
No,
Causality.
Causality.
Are you making a very firm causality claim?
I'm making weak exogeneity causality. So I don't know whether you want to call it a causality or not, but it's weak exogeneity, meaning what you measure in wave two cannot impact what you measure in wave one.
Doesn't mean anything.
Okay, we can move on, I guess. For the moment, if you have other questions, there's one we can continue. So,
Sure.
are there any new question, additional question, or we should, yes, Marcus, please.
Just following up on a question earlier about.
From Terry Hall, yeah,
No.
Oh, from the other one.
About the regions.
right,
And I think it would be worth looking at Central Java. And so with these kinds of surveys, and you have 2,000 respondents, so you can only look at the big provinces. Right, that means West Java, Central Java, East Java. With everybody else, you don't have reliable data. But Central Java was the battleground state. That's the one that experienced the biggest changes. That's where
Mm-hmm.
the voter movement from Ganja voters towards Prabowo voters happened in a rapid period of time. So I think that's where you would want to look
Yeah,
to see, especially in your second
yeah.
data, how swing voters moved and how PDIP loyalists that were previously going for Ganja, how they moved. And I think then you could actually have a very interesting storyline that, you know, says a lot more about how actually Prabowo won this election and how disinformation could have potentially played a role.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I think Central Java is yeah, really interesting region to check precisely because it used to be a big PDIP loyal supporters, but Prabowo won, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Well, one, and again, if you look at Central Java, how this happened, it happens very fast. And Ganja collapses within several weeks between your wave one and wave two.
Okay.
We have another online question. Okay.
Nothing was one half the whole year. All activity completed by 3:45 p.m.
So this is questions from Dr. Bedri Sahin. He is joining from Germany now. And he asked about social media in the world now influences voters positively and negatively. What do you think about the impact of social media on Indonesian voters? Yeah, that's just the question.
I think I might have some descriptive statistics that, oh, is it still working?
Move the mouse and the mouse or so
If it's idle, it's
back to yeah.
Just to look at what social media, right? Okay, first of all, disinformation and election propaganda narrative, including the fake videos that we just discussed, were more likely to be seen or heard through social media, right? And chat messaging apps. According to our survey, shows that 3/4 of respondents access the internet with WhatsApp, YouTube, and TikTok being the most accessed social media for election news. Not only for, we have other questions about just access to social media and chat messaging apps, but this is but WhatsApp, YouTube, and TikTok was the most accessed social media, particularly for accessing election-related news and information. So, and okay, in regards to, okay. Interestingly, trust on social media declined during the election campaigns, but not information and news related, not election related news and information that were being spread via direct conversation. So it's only trust on social media that declined during election campaigns. Those, you know, people are aware that a lot of disinformation, election propaganda narratives were spread during the election campaigns, and hence their trust declined. And the perceptions, not necessarily the real incidents, but when we ask their people's perceptions on incidents on online fake news, hate speech, and slander also increased during election campaigns. On the contrary, there was no perceived increase in fake news, hate speech, or slander found in direct conversation or in mainstream media. So there's only an increase in perception in terms of fake news, hate speech, and slander found in social media and chat messaging apps. Yeah, so that's basically what I can show in regards to related to social media and chat messaging apps. So we